this afternoon sometime. They went to go pick him up at the hotel. What's going to happen is he's going to have his initial appearance in front of a magistrate judge tomorrow, probably in Manhattan. When he's there, they're going to unseal the indictment and they're going to hit him with the charges. I predict it's probably going to be sex trafficking and racketeering because, and I could talk about why it's going to be racketeering here in a second, but he's going to go to his initial appearance in front of a magistrate judge. That magistrate judge is going to assign him to a district judge because he's been indicted, so now his case is going to go to a district judge for his initial appearance because it's mandatory by law that you go see a judge within 24 to 72 hours of you being arrested. So he's going to get the charges read to him that are on the indictment. He's not going to actually enter a plea. It's an initial appearance only. They're going to tell him he has the right to remain silent, blah, blah, blah. And then they're going to ask, hey, what does the government want to do as far as like his bond, which I'm assuming him and his legal team are probably posturing to try to get him released on a bond tomorrow is what I'm assuming, which is why he's been so cooperative and flew up to New York and kind of made himself available to the feds because he knew that this indictment was imminent.
Okay, do you believe that magistrate judge, which is going to be tasked with the initial appearance, do you think that, again, we're talking high-profile case, it's a lot of man-hours, a lot of money.
Yeah.
Do you think that they are prepared to deal with a potential bond application or a bond, almost initial appearance to listening to bond tomorrow, or it's something that they will probably put off to another date?
I think they'll probably kind of figure it out tomorrow. I think the whole purpose of him cooperating with the government the way he has was for this very moment so that he can get bond. And if he doesn't get it on this one, there'll probably be a bond hearing shortly thereafter, maybe a couple days after, where they just will strictly have a bond hearing because he's not going to be entitled to what's called a preliminary hearing to establish probable cause because he's been indicted by a grand jury. So the next step is going to be the arraignment, which is where he's actually going to formally enter his plea. And obviously there's going to be a potential bond hearing if they need it. But I think more than likely he's either A, going to get the bond tomorrow, or B, there'll be a bond hearing specifically for that where, his attorneys are going to argue on his behalf and say that he's not a flight risk or a danger to the community, which are the two main prerequisites to, get yourself bond. He'll probably surrender his passport if he hasn't already. And yeah, but I predict he's probably going to get out on bond, which is why he's been so cooperative with them in the first place.
Okay. All right. So let's deal with some, minute details. And I know you've been there where you're the main case agent and you've gotten a case, you've presented it, and I don't know, maybe worked it up, maybe your chain of command, but eventually they got approved to go to the U.S. Attorney's Office. They say, yes, we're going to go with this. Somehow there is either an indictment or it's just written up in a complaint, and you now have to serve the arrest warrant. What do you think? So this one came down via TMZ today. They said they plan to arrest him tomorrow, but something came up. We don't know what. They haven't said. They had to do it today. In your experience, what was this like? Again, obviously you're saying that you believe that there was a presentment today, that the true bill of indictment came through. So they're aware of it. What do you think could have changed the circumstances? You just, again, we're spitballing. We don't know everything, but, you're probably the best person we could ask.
Yeah, sure. I can explain that. So, so I guess I could talk about the case agent perspective, then we'll go into the indictment. So for the audience that's wondering, because they might not understand some of these terms. So guys, the case agent is the agent or the special agent in this case that's going to be responsible, that's running that investigation, right? He's running the case. He's coordinating directly with the U.S. attorney, right? The AUSA, Assistant United States Attorney, that's doing the case. And they're kind of working together. Now, the feds work a lot differently than the state. And what I mean by this is the special agent and the prosecutor are on the phone like almost every day. They become like best friends because you don't have the same level of authority, counter to, what people think, right? Common to belief, what people think is, people think, oh yeah, feds have all this power, etc. The reality is the feds don't have that much power. We don't have the same authority to do probable cause arrests like state and locals do. State and local finds you on the car, right? And you're drinking and driving, you got a DUI or whatever. They can just go ahead and make that probable cause arrest right there. Or they catch you with drugs. They can make that arrest there. Feds don't work that way. They need to call a prosecutor, a federal prosecutor, and say, look, I got XYZ, I want to go ahead and prosecute this case, which rarely happens with probable cause arrest. Most cases at the federal level are done by indictment, as you guys are seeing here. And I can explain that whole process if you want me to. But regardless, Diddy in this case was indicted. So that means that this agent went in with the prosecutor.
Wait, hold on.
Go ahead.
You're giving some new information I didn't know. So
Yeah, this is pretty extensive. So, stop me wherever you need to.
Yeah. Okay. So you just explained what most people, because again, when we hear the feds, it's like the boogeyman, right? So like that's just super different, right? So for example, yeah, if a local police pulls you over this and third, and they have probable cause, they could just arrest you and hit you with the charges when they get to the station, whatever the case is, right?
100%.
But you're saying that the feds don't move like that.
No, they don't. And the reason why, right? So I'll give you guys a perfect example. When I was on the southwest border, right? Someone comes in, tries to smuggle drugs through the port. Customs and Border Protection arrests them, right? Detain them because they got the drugs right then and there. They call HSI. I show up. I seize the drugs. I take the individual. I call the prosecutor. I say, look, we got him here with 10 kilos of coke at the bridge. He's confessed, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to write up a criminal complaint. Are you guys going to accept prosecution? Yeah, we got you. Boom. Okay, so I take him, drop him off at the jail, go back to the office, write up my criminal complaint, send it to the AUSA. He sends it to the judge. Next morning, I'm there, swear to it, sign it, blah, blah, blah. And then, that was a probable cause arrest in that case. That doesn't happen often at the federal level. Most of the time, you're doing a long-term investigation. You're working hand-in-hand with the prosecutor, which is why they're close, like I explained before, and you're building up a case that might take months, if not years, to build up. And on top of that, you had to go to the AUSA prior and say, look, I'm doing this investigation. This is the target. This is the organization, blah, blah, blah. You got to sell it because AUSAs have a lot of discretion which cases they take and which cases they don't take. They might say, hey, that's not good enough for us. Go ahead and take it to the state. We're not going to go ahead and take that. So probable cause arrests aren't as common at the federal level. You typically have to go through an AUSA and get indicted after a long-term investigation. That's why the feds don't have the same arrest authority as the state and locals do. State and locals can arrest you all day if they see you with drugs or they see that you're drunk or disorderly conduct, whatever the fuck it may be. They have a lot more power with probable cause arrest because district attorney's offices are a lot more flexible than United States attorney's offices. Does that make sense?
No, it makes absolute sense. And by the way, you're giving us information that we would have not known, because I think a lot of times when we think of law enforcement, we think, obviously we hear about 97% conviction rate when it comes to the feds, but we think pretty much law enforcement is law enforcement. We're just thinking that's the prosecutor's office.
Well, okay, that's cool. Precisely why they win so many cases, because the AUSAs have such discretion. They don't take cases unless, like, put it this way, AUSA is not going to indict you 99% of the time unless they're not sure they're going to win at trial. Like when I used to come in with my grand jury packet to indict somebody, it wasn't just for indictment or probable cause. The AUSA was like, I need enough where if we went to trial tomorrow, we would win. So the feds don't mess around with that because they have such discretion. That's why they have such high conviction rates, is because when they indict you, they're already ready for trial, ready to go. So
Diddy's finished.
Yeah, dude, it's a wrap.
Damn.
Oh, okay. So let's, again, we don't know for sure, but again, this is the best source anyone could have it right now. And by the way, thank you, Myron. And by the way, Fresh, what up, my nigga?
What up, bro?
Yeah, this is my office. Like, I worked out of the Miami field office, but the New York office, I'm very familiar with how they work. This is my agency, so I know exactly how they work. This was, a human trafficking 15 case. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So here's a question I have. So I want you to kind of walk me through. Okay, you were a case agent, right?
Yeah.
And at what point do you pass it over to the U.S. Attorney's Office? And so how much of the work here is there like an agent or maybe a couple of agents doing versus, okay, this is when we definitely know this is in the U.S. Attorney's hands and they're making these plays. So you
Good
break
question.
it down from at least
sure.
externally what we've seen.
So this is how I think. This is what I, speculate the investigation started to some degree. When Cassie first came out and said that she was being abused by him, etc., right? And they might have got tips and everything else like this from before, right, from the tip line or whatever. What I think more than likely happened was they started talking to a couple of people, going out, doing a couple knock and talks. Hey, this seems a little weird. These women keep coming forward and complaining about, nefarious sexual activity with Diddy from dating back from the 90s, whatever. This is a little weird. And at that point, especially if you're dealing with someone high profile, after the second or third or fourth interview where you might have a good witness or two, you're going to the United States Attorney's Office early on, right? And you're saying, look, this is the target, this is who he is, this is what we think we can build, etc. We talked to these people, whatever. And I think in a case like this, they more than likely had the U.S. Attorney's Office ear early on. And, I've always said this, the feds in the United States Attorney's Office, right? They like clout. They like the ability to prosecute high-profile individuals. It's going to hit the news. It's going to be big, a big W for them, a big press release. So I'm assuming once they figured out who the guy was, right, Diddy, they probably were working with the United States Attorney's Office fairly early on this, is what I predict. Given the nature of who the individual was. And also keep in mind, there was a successful prosecution with R. Kelly prior to this. So, some of, if I'm not mistaken, some of the AUSAs that were on that case were also involved in this R. Kelly case.
All right,
are involved in this Diddy case that were involved in the R. Kelly case. Sorry.
Yeah. So let me ask you this question, right? And you mentioned your prediction, and I guess you could expound on your prediction for charges, and I would love to hear you explain that before. But in following up to that, I also want you to, answer the question of, okay, if because you mentioned racketeering,
yeah,
and usually when people are in a racket, it's more than one. It's just not a singular individual. And maybe I'm wrong, but do you believe that this indictment solely falls on Sean Diddy Combs, or maybe there are 3, 4, 5, 6, a dozen other people, maybe not charged with everything, but kind of ancillary people who the prosecutor is going to try to dance along maybe in a trial and say, hey, these were the people that were doing his bidding, but he was making a call. What do you think?
Yeah, so the reason why they're going to have to use the racketeering statute, right, is because a lot of these crimes happened a long time ago, right? Like some of these crimes are beyond the statute of limitations. So in order for the prosecutors to kind of bring in some of those allegations that happened in the 90s or maybe even the 80s or early 2000s or whatever, they're going to need to go ahead and prove that he was committing these crimes for a period of time, right? Racketeering activity, right? And the criminal organization is ongoing, or the criminal enterprise is ongoing. So that is why they're going to have to do this under the auspice of RICO, so that they can go ahead and say, look, we're going to bring in all these other crimes, right, that were done decades ago because he's been doing it for a while. So sex trafficking is considered a crime that falls under the RICO Act, right? There's drug trafficking, there's violence, witness intimidation, there's extortion, all these different types of crimes that they typically had there historically to go after organized crime like the mafia, whatever. As long as they can prove that he's still committing these crimes to some degree, they can bring in all those allegations from prior, but they need to do it under the RICO statute to be able to bring them in, so they get around this whole statute of limitations problem.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I spoke about that before too. Could you so sex trafficking, and I've heard a few, us YouTubers on here, obviously the 99.9, and you're obviously the 0.1% that has worked in law enforcement.
Yeah.
Like we're either like ghetto lawyers, or we're going off like what we either know from either our experience dealing with the criminal justice system, or just kind of like looking at these things a lot. Could you explain sex trafficking? Because I've heard,
Sure.
like, for example, like Whack 100 said, yo, well, if you fly a girl out and you fuck her, and if she alleges that there's an abuse there, well, the person crossed state lines, this and third, it's sex trafficking. And I'm like, damn, that's kind of like a very loose and broad, interpretation of what sex trafficking could be. What is sex trafficking? And where would a federal authority start to look at it in?
So I'm going to just kind of give the more practical agent side of it, right? So the thing with sex trafficking, and this is very contrary to what people think, it's not as common as people think it is, right? What people always conflate sex trafficking with is human smuggling, bringing in illegal aliens into the United States for a sum or a fee. Those individuals are brought into the United States. Their families are being extorted, etc. That's human smuggling. Now, does it lead to human trafficking later on when they get into the United States and they're forced to work jobs or whatever it may be? Of course. But people often conflate human smuggling with human trafficking, which are two completely different crimes. One is, AUSC 1324. The other one is a far more serious crime that's 18 USC, right, which is the criminal code versus the immigration code. So that's number one. Number two, as far as sex trafficking goes, it's actually fairly hard to prove. A lot of the times when people think that they got a sex trafficking case, and I know this because I've been on so many of these different raids, is what ends up happening is you bust a prostitution ring, right? You thought, oh yeah, we had these girls are being trafficked, whatever. You talk to them and they all love their pimp. They don't want to cooperate. They don't want to say that they were being held or whatever. You know, some of them are lying to protect them. Some of them were trafficked or whatever. But the point is that it's very difficult to get witnesses because sometimes they don't want to necessarily cooperate. So what ends up happening is you just end up getting everyone arrested for solicitation charges, right? Ends up being just a prostitution ring bust. Now, the way to get around that though, right, which is how the feds come in a lot of the times, is if the girls are under 18, it's an automatic human trafficking charge. Automatic.
Wow.
So that's where they're going to get them. Is some of these girls, from what I understand, were under 18 at the time when Diddy was messing with them and bringing them around in different states. That's where I think they're going to get them. I mean, I'll have to look at the indictment to see, but this is my prediction.
Okay, let me interject and add. So on one of the particular civil cases that he has is that there was a young woman who was 17 that was supposedly, she met someone that worked for his label. That person said, hey, I think Diddy would like you. They called Diddy. Diddy spoke to the girl, spoke to the person, and then within a matter of hours, the girl got on a private jet to fly to Diddy.
Damn.
And allegedly was around him. By the way, this girl, I'll post it here. I'll send you a link if you want to show it on, your stream.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Or you could even Google 17-year-old Diddy. There's multiple like articles about it. Her face is blurred out. She was seen sitting on his lap. Okay, there's a New York Post. I'll post it in the chat here. I don't know if.
Okay, yeah, because Bill's on the computer, so he could do it.
Okay, all right. So Bills, you could just click from the chat. Is a chat between me and Myron, and it's a New York Post thing. It says Sean Diddy Combs accused of drugging and gang R-wording a 17-year-old in a new suit. There's photos of this girl sitting on his lap. Obviously, she's not shown for obvious reasons. She was 17 at the time.
We got the link, yeah.
Her lawsuit against him says she was gang R-worded, but what's also very important is she was 17.
Yep.
Here's the important part. I think she was in, I believe, let me make sure, Detroit, I believe, and then he was either in New York, and let me just make sure, chat, I'm sorry. Yes, the woman says she met Pierre, who was an executive at Bad Boys Entertainment. So she met one of his workers in Detroit at a lounge, and then essentially he called Sean Diddy Combs on the phone and convinced the teen to fly to New York City. Before leaving the lounge, they said the worker took her to the bathroom where he smoked crack with her and apparently had her have sex with him first.
Yeah.
Then he put her in a private jet from Pontiac, Michigan. She landed in Teterboro, New Jersey, which this is where Jay-Z and everybody who got a private jet who goes to New York lands in Jersey at Teterboro. That's fact.
Okay.
And yeah, they drove to a studio, and she has pictures to prove she's with him.
Yeah. So
Would that be
that's
considered as sex trafficking?
Yeah, that's a cut and dry human trafficking right there at the federal level because she's not 18. He moved her in between states. That affects interstate commerce. So that's where they're going to get them. And I know some of the audience here might be shocked by me saying that human trafficking isn't as prevalent as people think, but it really isn't. It's really the human smuggling that is the extremely common thing that people tend to conflate because they're two completely different crimes. But the big way, and I know this from being on human trafficking task forces and working with these guys closely, a lot of the times when they do these busts, what ends up happening is it's prostitution ring and they don't want to cooperate against the pimp. They're not really being abused. They're doing it willingly and they're of age. However, if they catch a girl there that's underage, then it morphs into human trafficking automatically because that woman can't consent.
I have a question.
That's how they get the nexus.
If the girl lied about her age, does that matter?
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. So if she's 17 and she was being, and there was a pimp and she was being prostituted, it's automatic human trafficking charge. And the feds will take that almost always. And the two biggest agencies that investigate human trafficking are Homeland Security Investigation, HSI, and the FBI.
Okay. Also, what about this? In different states, there's different ages of consent.
Yeah.
So on a state level, I believe, and we could Google it for New York age of consent.
It might be 17.
That is 17. Now, that's statewide. Obviously, the national age of consent federally is 18. Could Diddy have an argument to say, well, she came here willingly and the age of consent in New York is 17?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if his legal team doesn't try it. But they're going to say, hey, federally it's 18. So we'll see what happens. And I think that's where he's going to have to pay his defense team the big bucks to make that argument in court for him.
Wow. Okay, so all right, we get sex trafficking. So I think everybody who's spoken
She
about
came
this,
from
and I've
Michigan?
spoken to
What's
you,
the
I've
age of
spoken to
consent in
Bradford Cohen.
Michigan? Do we know
I gotta get you with Bradford Cohen. Like, I'm telling you, like he's an invaluable mind that everything he's predicted when it comes to these proceedings have always been correct. And I think you and him, you guys are like, it would be like a power couple. Pause. Anyway.
Yeah, sure. But wait, she came from Michigan, you said, right?
Yes, she came from Detroit,
What's
Michigan.
the age of consent? 16 in Michigan? Okay, all right. I was just looking to see what the age of consent is in Michigan. But sorry, what was the next thing you wanted to hit?
Okay, so I guess we're looking at the litany of charges he could face. It appears that sex trafficking is going to be on the bill, right? There's been rumors about, well, the 1999 shooting, the club shooting, that supposedly, the woman who was shot in the face, who believes that Diddy was the one who pulled the trigger, but New York state did not charge Diddy with that crime. Instead, they blame it on Shine.
Yep.
That particular situation, we're hearing about the Tupac situation. We're hearing about maybe other, and I had said this earlier, but I want to get your take on it. Remember the first person when they did the raid that was arrested, the only person that was, arrested, not detained, was supposedly the drug mule.
Oh, yeah, the white guy.
And we hear a lot of drugs. Do we see maybe some drug charges kind of mixed into it? It kind of gives it some color. No, unfortunately, I'm not trying to just content this out, but just like it kind of makes it seem like, hey, it's not only sex trafficking. This is a drug-fueled environment. And then maybe could add some violence in with,
they would do it to pad up the racketeering, right? So when you're hitting people with RICO, right? Like, you have certain crimes in there that you want to show to establish that it's a criminal enterprise and they're committing crimes in furtherance of the organization, right? So, like I said, there's a couple different crimes that fall under the racketeering, right? Vehicle theft, extortion, murder, kidnapping, drug trafficking, etc. So what I predict is, right, we don't know the indictment yet. We'll see it tomorrow probably when it's unsealed, when he goes in front of the judge. They might put that in there to kind of pad that this is a component to the criminal organization, because some of these women that are victims, complained and said, oh yeah, I was under the influence of drugs, they were readily available to me, etc. So they can use that to kind of substantiate and prop up this RICO charge, because the reason why they're using the RICO is because the RICO allows them to bring in all these other cases in that might have been kind of fallen by the wayside due to statute of limitations. RICO allows them to bring it back in. It's kind of like the glue that holds everything together, if that makes sense.
Okay. Do you think that there will be any specific charges of, sexual assault?
Yeah. I mean, for sure, because the thing is that they've had this grand jury convened for a very long time. I remember reading about this originally, like almost 2 to 3 months ago, that they started doing these grand jury things. So that tells me the fact that they're indicting him now, that they got a lot of witnesses.
Like again, we have no idea about federal grand juries. It feels like they've presented this case for 2 months.
Okay, let me explain how grand jury works to the federal level. Give me 1 second. Hold on. So, because a lot of people, so the grand jury is nothing more than a group of your peers that sit in a room and deliberate on cases based on probable cause, right? So, not to be confused with a trial jury, right, where it's like, 12, 6 or 12, whatever that may be, right? 12 people. So a grand jury, right, the AUSA convene, and they typically serve for 3 months, 6 months, whatever it may be, and they'll sit there, and the grand jury typically convenes once a week, depending on how busy the United States Attorney's Office is, how often they're indicting cases, whatever it may be. So what ends up happening is the AUSA comes in with their case agent, and the AUSA asks the case agent questions, right? And the case agent presents evidence to the case. Now, keep in mind, I want to make this very clear. It's just to establish probable cause, guys. Probable cause is not that high of a threshold, right? But like I said before, when you're indicting, the AUSA pretty much is ready to go to trial. So it's probable cause just to get the indictment, but obviously the AUSA is looking long-term to win a trial. So you go in there, and I've testified literally hundreds of times. You go in there, they sit you down, they swear you in, and they ask you questions, right? The AUSA asks you questions on the case, you explain the case, then they open it up for a Q&A for the grand jury to ask you questions. You answer any questions in there about the case, anything that wasn't clear. You walk out the grand jury room, you and the AUSA, you give them some time to deliberate. Depending on how complex the case is, that will dictate how long it takes them to deliberate, and then you get something called a true bill of indictment after the fact. That true bill of indictment is filed with the clerk, and then you go ahead and you get an arrest warrant from the judge. And that's to answer your question that you mentioned before, hey, why did they pick him up tonight versus tomorrow? What I'm assuming is, since they had the grand jury convening, right, and they knew that he was going to be indicted today, I guarantee they had probably agents watching him the whole time, and they saw he was at the hotel lobby. They're like, bro, we got eyes on him. It's safe to do it. We technically have an arrest warrant for him now, and in the arrest warrant, if you look at any federal arrest warrant, it says at the bottom, you are hereby commanded to arrest XYZ, right? So if you got him in plain sight and it's easy, it's safe to effect the arrest, you kind of have to arrest him because you've been commanded by a magistrate judge now that you have that arrest warrant, or a district judge, depending on whatever it is. But regardless, you got an arrest warrant from the judge. So they probably had eyes on him the whole time. They saw he was in the hotel lobby. Arrest warrant was signed by the judge. They just picked him up right then and there. That's what I predict why they picked him up this evening.
So you're not thinking that maybe, even though he seems like he has to be cooperative, you don't think that maybe, I don't know, he was like, oh, I got to go back to Miami, and maybe like he hit like his plane guy, like, hey, let's go back to Miami, because I don't know if he would know when the indictment will be coming down, and they're like, no, fuck that. We're not gonna wait till he gets on another plane. That could have been a reason too. I mean, I'm thinking, typically the most simple answer tends to be the answer. What I'm predicting is they probably have been having him. They've had him under surveillance for a few days now, especially knowing that the grand jury convened and it was going to indict him today, kind of to see if he was going to run or see what would happen. And at this point, with the way his attorney was talking with the feds, what was that? Do you think that maybe they have his phone? Like, what's the surveillance like at this point? I use 6ix9ine as an example. Basically, like 6ix9ine said, like, I remember him explain to me in depth. He said, "Yo, I knew what it was every time I went outside. There was always a car that drove right by. It was always unmarked. There was always like this one car up there. Like it was basically." He said he kind of knew, but not really knew that he was being definitely heavily surveilled. And also, essentially his phones were also being tapped as well. Did you think they tap his phone just for this purpose?
No, I'm pretty certain that they did. Because here's the thing. So another common misconception. People think that tapping a phone is very easy. Getting a federal Title III, which is what it means to get live communication, guys, is extremely fucking difficult. And I can tell you guys this because I've written an affidavit and gotten a Title III before. It's very fucking hard to get one because here's the thing. When you write search warrants, right, a phone tap is the most intrusive, almost one of the most intrusive law enforcement techniques that you can use. So typically the more intrusive the search, the more probable cause you need to conduct that search. And I've said this before, I'll say it again. You need more probable cause to listen to someone's phone than to fucking arrest them. And the reason why is because you're not only infringing on that individual's, privacy, right, or violating the Fourth Amendment to a degree while you're doing it legally. You're also listening into the private conversations of other individuals that may or may not be subjects of investigation. So when you're listening to their phone, it's one of the highest standards of getting a search warrant because you're listening in, and it has to go through a bunch of different people. A district judge has to sign it. It needs to go through something called OEO at the U.S. Department of Justice. It's very difficult to get a wiretap. So what I predict is, since this crime was a crime of things that occurred years ago, it wouldn't make sense, and I actually doubt that they would have the probable cause required to get a phone line tapped to actually listen to stuff, because I don't know if you want me to go into this, but to get an actual Title III, you need dirty phone calls, you need informants, you need a pen register, which this is all, if you really want me to go into this, how a phone tap works, I can, but because I've done it, but I'm 99% sure that they didn't do any Title III intercepts on this investigation, because this is a more historical investigation where you're interviewing witnesses of crimes that occurred in the past, which is why they're using the racketeering statute, because they're trying to bring in these crimes to kind of save them from statute of limitations problems.
Wow. No, again, I'm so thankful to have you on here. It's like invaluable.
I will say this. What they could have been doing, though, instead of a phone tap, right? Because I want to be very clear here. There's different ways to exploit telephones from a law enforcement perspective, right? There's different thresholds. There's something called a ping warrant, right? Which I've done this a million times when I would follow drug traffickers around, where you're able to track the phone, right, and get an update. It's up to you how you want to do it, but you can get it 30 minutes, hour, etc. And you basically know where the guy is going, right? Now, with that said, they would have to prove that the telephone and his travel was involved in some type of criminal activity. So for drug traffickers, it's easy, because you could be like, look, this guy's going to be having a pattern of behavior where he's going to be picking up drugs from individuals and meeting at stash houses, etc. We need to know where he's going, right? Or you can use this to put a tracker on a vehicle too, where you're like, hey, he's involved in this type of crime. I need to know where he's going, etc. So they could do what's called a ping warrant on him to know where he's going at all times. That might not be needed, though, because obviously his defense team was cooperating with him. So that could be a play as well, but I kind of doubt it in this situation since he was cooperating. Then you have something called a pen register. And a pen register, a.k.a. a trap and trace, is where so they basically will get every single person calling you, right, and every single phone call that you make. Now, it doesn't show the contents of the conversation or what's being said, but it just shows frequency. So I'll give you an example. Let's say I'm watching a drug trafficker and I know that he's involved in dealing cocaine or methamphetamine, whatever, right? And I see that he calls this one certain phone number the most. I'm going to do a subpoena on that phone number, identify who that individual is, and I find out, oh, this guy has a criminal history for trafficking drugs, boom. And I start to identify the organization, right? And then that's how you kind of build it out. That's another way to exploit the telephones. I doubt that they're doing that, though, because this isn't a drug trafficking investigation. He's not actively involved in the crimes anymore. If anything, he's probably, trying to avoid it. So I doubt that they did a pen register, too. I think in this case, they just had good old-fashioned, eye surveillance. His legal team was cooperating, and then this is a historical case anyway. So this is strictly based on witness testimony. It's going to be a witness testimony-heavy investigation.